The Boston skyline glittered, a million tiny promises reflecting in the expensive glass of their penthouse, perfectly framing Ethan and Olivia's seemingly flawless marriage. The evening was quiet, save for the soft clinking of ice in their Scotch glasses, a familiar rhythm of two people who had mastered the art of elegant silence. But then, a notification flashed on Olivia's forgotten phone, its light too sharp, too insistent in the tranquil dark. Ethan didn't need to read the sender's name to know the delicate truce of their life was a lie, and the perfect facade of their love was about to shatter, leaving behind a silence far more deafening than any argument. There are secrets behind those closed doors that reshape everything we thought we knew about trust and sin. If you enjoy these razor-sharp slices of emotional danger and the hidden costs of modern desire, then you're exactly where you need to be. Stay with us as we uncover the quiet, devastating aftermath of a secret left unspoken. The Charles River was a ribbon of molten silver beneath the Boston skyline, and from the 73rd floor of the Hayes' penthouse, the world looked both infinite and utterly contained. Ethan Hayes, architect and proprietor of one of the city's most sought-after firms, leaned against the window, the cool glass a momentary relief against the slow, creeping heat of a fatigue that had nothing to do with blueprints or deadlines. At 38, he possessed the clean, sculpted lines of a man who succeeded not by brute force, but by meticulous planning and an unwavering eye for structural integrity. Irony, he often thought in these quiet, late hours, was a cruel master. He could design structures that would stand for a century, yet the foundation of his own life was silently crumbling. Olivia was in the galley kitchen, a space of pristine white marble and polished steel that mirrored her own cool, impeccable style. She was arranging 2 glasses of chilled Sancerre, her movements fluid and practiced. Olivia, the gallerist, the curator of beautiful things, including their life together. She was 36, all sharp cheekbones and effortless elegance, a woman who seemed more comfortable with the abstract cruelty of modern art than with the messy, tangible reality of a long marriage. They spoke in the low, modulated tones of people who had exhausted all possibility of surprise years ago. "The O'Malley project signed today," Ethan said, pushing off the glass. "It's the tower on the harbor, our biggest to date." Olivia paused, her hand hovering over a bottle opener shaped like a Renaissance sculpture. "That's wonderful, Ethan. I knew you'd land it." Her voice was genuine, or perhaps genuinely pleased by the promise of the resulting prestige and capital. She slid one glass across the enormous granite island toward him. "Marcus's new installation is next week. We're expecting a crowd. You should try to make it." "Marcus!" The name settled between them like a shard of ice. Marcus Thorne, the brooding, brilliant artist Olivia represented, a man 5 years her junior whose work was currently driving the buzz in the city's contemporary scene. Ethan had met him once, a quick, dismissive handshake, and instantly cataloged him as a threat, passionate, unpredictable, and entirely antithetical to the ordered life Ethan had built. "I'll check the schedule," Ethan murmured, though he knew he wouldn't. Checking the schedule was his polite camouflage for refusal. The silence returned, a heavy velvet cloak woven from years of unsaid things. They were 2 highly successful entities coexisting in a luxury ecosystem, but the emotional climate had dropped below freezing long ago. Ethan found himself wondering, not for the first time, if their marriage was simply a well-funded, legally binding corporation. Later, around 10 o'clock, while they watched a European film with subtitles they barely registered, Olivia excused herself to run a bath. Her phone remained on the low, minimalist coffee table, its screen dark. Ethan's attention had drifted. He was drafting a structural column in his mind, tracing the stresses and load points. The phone suddenly flared to life, a bright white splash against the polished mahogany. It was a text message notification. Only the first line was visible in the preview, but it was enough to stop the rotation of the earth for Ethan. From Marcus. Text preview. "I can't stop thinking about this afternoon. It was..." The screen went black again. The message was incomplete, truncated by the phone's settings, but in the silence of their meticulously curated living room, it screamed. It wasn't the content that was damning, not yet, But the mere existence of the message at this late hour, coupled with the sudden, undeniable rush of blood to Ethan's temples. This afternoon, was it a museum meeting, a planning session, or something far more intimate that required this level of immediate, late-night confession? Ethan felt a dizzying pressure in his chest, a sensation identical to a beam failing under an excessive, uncalculated load. His first purely instinctual reaction was to snatch the phone, to unlock it, to confirm the disaster and unleash the inevitable, cathartic storm. But Ethan Hayes was a man of control. He was the architect. He saw the impending explosion, the total wreckage of the structure he inhabited, and he calculated the cost. He saw the screaming, the accusations, the inevitable, ugly public dissolution that would follow, tearing apart their joint assets, their reputations, the very definition of who they were in the eyes of the city. He didn't want the noise. He didn't want the confrontation. He didn't want the spectacle. He breathed in, slow and deep, the expensive air-conditioned air feeling thin and toxic. He looked from the phone to the closed door of the master suite, where the sound of running water had just ceased. Olivia was humming. She sounded happy. He let the moment stretch, 1 minute, 2 minutes, a small eternity in which he made the pivotal, devastating choice that would define the rest of their lives. He did not touch the phone. He did not unlock it. He simply leaned back on the sofa, picking up the remote control and restarting the foreign film. He settled his features into the bland mask of a tired husband. The truth was a ticking device on the table, and Ethan had just decided not to disarm it. He chose silence. He chose observation. He chose to carry the weight of this secret, letting this suspicion turn into a cold, hard resolve. He would confirm the full scope of the collapse on his own terms. When Olivia emerged 20 minutes later, wrapped in a silk robe, smelling of lavender and expensive oils, she kissed him lightly on the crown of his head. "Good night, sweetheart." "Good night, Liv," he replied, his voice perfectly level, the lie already an integrated part of his structure. He watched her retreat, the image of the phone screen. "Marcus, I can't stop thinking about this afternoon," burned into his retina. Ethan sat there until 2 a.m., the glow of the television reflecting in his empty eyes, beginning the cold, precise construction of his exit strategy. The gilded cage was about to be abandoned. The immediate aftermath of the partial message felt less like a volcanic eruption and more like a tectonic shift. A slow, grinding rearrangement beneath the surface of their lives. Ethan did not confront. He did not accuse. He began to observe, transforming his raw, acidic pain into a cold, scientific methodology. He was no longer a husband. He was the primary investigator of his own failed structure, utilizing the very skill set that had made him successful, identifying stress points, analyzing structural fatigue, and calculating the moment of total collapse. He started by analyzing the schedule. Olivia's gallery, Aperture, was hosting a series of late-night artist spotlight sessions. Before, these events were rare, maybe once a month. Now they were a twice-weekly staple, often followed by the curt explanation. Marcus needed input on the final staging. Ethan noticed the subtle shift in her perfume, a new, earthier scent that replaced the expensive floral fragrance she normally wore. He noted the way she now carried her phone, almost protectively, flipping it face down on any surface. A small, involuntary movement of self-preservation. Their conversations became carefully choreographed, ballets of avoidance. Ethan would ask about her day, and she would provide broad, technical details about logistics and budgets. Nothing personal, nothing emotional. The chasm between them was not a sudden crack, but a slowly widening gulf, masked only by the sheer size of their opulent apartment. One Tuesday, Ethan left his downtown office early, claiming a headache to his assistant. He drove his German sedan across the city, the anonymity of the tinted windows affording him a peculiar kind of solitude. He parked several blocks away from Aperture, a minimalist space in the revitalized Shipyard District, known for its brutalist architecture and its isolation after dark. He waited. He hadn't told Olivia he was coming. This wasn't about catching them in a public, scandalous moment. It was about confirming what he already knew, stripping away the last desperate layer of plausible deniability his mind clung to. It was about obtaining the irrefutable evidence he needed to justify the irreversible decision he was building up to. At 7:30, the gallery was still brightly lit, hosting a small, self-important reception. Ethan saw Olivia, radiant in a tailored black suit, moving among patrons, her professional smile locked in place. Marcus Thorne was beside her, his dark, intense eyes fixed on her as she spoke. Marcus, the artist, wearing the uniform of creative rebellion, faded denim, a well-worn leather jacket, and the inescapable aura of someone who lived wholly outside the confines of a mortgage or a corporate board meeting. Everything Ethan was not. Ethan watched for 2 hours, maintaining a clinical distance. He saw the accidental brush of hands as they reached for the same champagne flute, the microsecond longer that Olivia held eye contact with Marcus than necessary. These were the hairline fractures in the concrete. The crowd thinned dramatically around 9. Ethan saw the security guard lock the front doors, leaving only the soft, directional spotlights focused on Marcus's centerpiece, a massive sculpture of tangled metal and light. Ethan waited another 10 minutes, then walked to the gallery's side entrance. A heavy steel service door tucked into an alley, which he knew led to the administrative offices and back storage area. He had fabricated an excuse earlier that day, a fake email to Olivia about a missing art consignment form, which he planned to use if discovered. But as he reached the service door, he found it slightly ajar, propped open by a stack of exhibition catalogs. Carelessness, or perhaps intentional urgency. Ethan slipped inside. The air was cool and smelled of varnish, old dust, and that new earthy perfume he now recognized. He moved through the dimly lit storage corridor, his footsteps muffled by the industrial carpet. He could hear faint voices coming from the main gallery floor. He reached the doorway leading into the main exhibition space. He stayed concealed in the shadow of a plaster wall, becoming the silent witness the moment deserved. Olivia and Marcus were standing near the centerpiece. She wasn't smiling her professional smile anymore. She was leaning slightly into him, her posture relaxed, vulnerable, a way she hadn't held herself near Ethan in years. Marcus was speaking, gesturing emphatically toward his sculpture, but his eyes kept returning to her face, not her critique. And then it happened, a small, simple gesture that contained the totality of their betrayal. Marcus stopped talking, lifted his hand, and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind Olivia's ear. It was a gesture of profound tenderness, intimacy, and proprietary comfort. A gesture that had no place between a gallerist and her client, especially at 9:30 p.m. in a locked room. Olivia did not pull away. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, a look of pure, unguarded contentment washing over her face. A moment of release. Ethan didn't need to see a kiss. He didn't need to hear words of love. That one touch, the hair, the gentle intimacy, was the final, devastating piece of evidence. It was the structural failure. It confirmed that the betrayal was not a drunken mistake or a fleeting physical lapse. It was an emotional investment, a new structure built on the ruins of his own. Ethan backed away, silent as a ghost. He felt nothing dramatic, no rage, no tears, just a chilling sense of finality. The pain was so deep it had circled back around to a profound, quiet relief. The question had been answered. The uncertainty had been extinguished. He was free to execute his plan. He slipped back out the service door, letting the catalogs fall slightly to make the latch catch, restoring the illusion of security behind him. Driving home, the city lights were now just cold, indifferent pinpricks. He realized he had not just gathered evidence of his wife's infidelity. He had gathered the permission he needed to destroy his own life and rebuild it from the ground up, alone, on his own terms. He would not give her the satisfaction of seeing him angry, hurt, or degraded. He would simply remove himself from the equation. The marriage was dead. Now he would merely dispose of the body. The drive home after leaving Aperture was less a commute and more a descent into absolute zero. The cold he felt had nothing to do with the Boston winter. It was the final, devastating equilibrium achieved when all emotional heat had been spent. Ethan arrived at the penthouse not as a grieving husband, but as a detached engineer called to assess the damage of a condemned building. The structure of his marriage was irreparable, and his only professional imperative now was to execute a controlled demolition, minimizing collateral damage to his own future. For the next 3 weeks, he lived a flawless double life. He mastered the mundane. He asked Olivia routine questions about her gallery. He discussed superficial plans for a non-existent weekend trip. He even maintained a regular, though strictly non-intimate, routine in their marital bed. He was constructing the most elaborate lie of his life, a facade of business as usual that would only make his eventual absence more shocking. His office, the nerve center of Hayes Architectural, became his war room. Every lunch break, every late night, was dedicated to untangling the intricate financial knots he and Olivia had woven over 15 years. He leveraged his position, moving personal equity from joint investment accounts into an obscure, independently managed blind trust in the Southwest, a region he had no prior connection to, ensuring minimal traceability. He was meticulous, using layers of corporate transfers that would appear, on the surface, to be legitimate business diversification rather than personal liquidation. He left the majority of their marital assets, the penthouse, the primary accounts, the prestigious firm itself, untouched for now. His goal was not financial warfare, but simple, absolute severing. He wanted to be untraceable, not rich. He only took what he needed for a quiet, clean start. The O'Malley Tower project, his magnum opus, required the most delicate attention. Ethan arranged for a month-long intensive design retreat in California, a known pressure tactic he often used. He assigned the work to his most capable associate, an overworked but loyal man named Daniel. He created detailed, meticulous handoff documents that covered every contingency, creating a perfectly logical, yet temporary, explanation for his sudden absence. A burnout, an overwhelming need for solitude to conquer the final, complex design stages. It was the perfect professional camouflage, a sabbatical masked as genius exhaustion. He purchased a new phone, registered under a disposable company name, and secured a minimal furnished rental unit in Phoenix, Arizona, all without leaving a digital trace that could be linked back to his primary life. He used cash and burner cards for all ancillary expenditures. Every action was calculated, precise, and devoid of the chaotic fury a typical divorce might entail. He was creating a perfect vacuum. The night he set the timeline for his departure, 3 days from then, he decided to cook. It was an impulsive yet necessary act of ceremony. He made her favorite dish, slow-cooked lamb shanks with saffron risotto, the apartment filled with the rich, warm scent of rosemary and wine, a comforting, domestic blanket that smelled entirely of the lie. Olivia arrived home late, tired but pleased by the unexpected effort. "This is beautiful, Ethan," she said, her voice softer than usual, perhaps touched by a flicker of guilt, or perhaps just genuine pleasure at the domestic moment. They ate by candlelight. Ethan watched her across the polished granite table, studying the familiar lines of her face, the slight furrow between her brows when she concentrated on her food, the way she habitually pushed her wineglass a quarter-inch too close to the edge. He didn't see the woman he loved anymore. He saw the antagonist in his final act, the person who had forced his hand. He felt a wave of profound, exhausted pity, not for himself, but for her, for the ignorance of the silent farewell he was currently enacting. To the O'Malley project, Ethan raised his glass, offering a toast to the distraction that was currently facilitating his escape. Olivia smiled, clinking her glass against his. "To us." He simply nodded, swallowing the bitter irony with his expensive wine. Later, after Olivia had fallen into a deep, heavy sleep, the sleep of a person who carries a great secret, Ethan began the physical act of severance. He did not open the walk-in closet full of custom suits and Italian shoes. He did not touch the photo albums that chronicled 2 decades of shared history. He retrieved the small, ballistic nylon travel bag he used for overnight trips. He filled it sparingly, his passport, 3 changes of clothes, his new phone, and a slim black ledger containing the key codes and access points for his newly established trust funds. That was all. The man, stripped of his context, was reduced to a few pounds of essentials. He stood by the window overlooking the silent city, the place where he had once felt like a king. Now he was a refugee. He looked at the vast, shared space, the art, the furniture, the life, and understood that all of it belonged to a man he no longer was. He placed the heavy gold band of his wedding ring carefully on the kitchen counter next to a recent utility bill. He didn't want the ring to be lost. He wanted it to be found exactly where he left it. Then, with the calculated movement of a man closing a complex, dangerous circuit, Ethan Hayes turned off the master bedroom light, closing the door on a life that was already over. The city was a study in hushed grays at 4:17 a.m. Ethan Hayes moved through the penthouse like a draft, a current of cold air that disturbed nothing. The only sound was the distant rhythmic hum of the building's massive HVAC system, a constant, indifferent heartbeat. He was dressed in dark, functional clothing, his identity erased down to the core essentials. The small nylon bag containing the totality of his future was light against his shoulder. He paused at the kitchen island. The gold band of his wedding ring, thick and polished, rested precisely next to the folded utility bill. The juxtaposition was deliberate, the symbol of their sacred bond placed beside a trivial, everyday obligation, a final statement that one was as meaningless as the other. He resisted the urge to write a single word. A note would grant her closure, an explanation, a final argument. His objective was absence, not communication. He picked up the keys to his car, then placed them back down. Using the primary car would leave an immediate, traceable flag. Instead, he took the service elevator down, walking the 5 blocks to the nearest transportation hub. He did not look back at the building, that monument to their shared ambition. He stepped onto the first anonymous commuter train headed south, merging instantly into the gray anonymity of the pre-dawn American machine. By 6:00 a.m., he was already miles from Boston, the new burner phone resting silent and cold in his pocket. Ethan Hayes had successfully executed his disappearing act. Olivia woke precisely at 7, startled by the unfamiliar silence. Ethan, the creature of routine, was always already gone by this time. A note left on the fridge, the scent of his cologne fading from the bathroom. But this morning, the apartment was pristine, silent, and empty. "Ethan," she called, her voice echoing unnaturally in the minimalist space. She checked his office. Desk clear, laptop closed. His side of the bed was already cool. Initially, she felt a vague annoyance, thinking he had simply taken an early flight for an unexpected meeting. She went into the kitchen to start the espresso machine. That's when she saw it. The wedding ring, resting beside the gas bill. It was not thrown or carelessly tossed. It was placed. This meticulousness, the cold geometry of the placement, hit her far harder than any angry note could have. It was a calculated move, signed with the silent, surgical precision of the man she had married. Olivia's hand flew to her left ring finger, bare, unfeeling, suddenly aware of the lightness. She remembered the routine of the night before, the lamb shanks, the forced toast. It wasn't a nice meal, it was a last supper. Panic, cold and sharp, replaced the initial shock. She snatched up her phone. His main line went straight to a generic voicemail box, full and unable to take new messages. She tried his work line. Daniel, his associate, answered with confusion. "Ethan's on the West Coast, Ms. Hayes. Didn't he tell you? A private retreat for the O'Malley final schematics. Said he needed absolute solitude. No communication. Top secret work." The lie was so perfectly constructed that it sounded utterly plausible to the outside world, a classic Ethan move. But Olivia, the silent witness to his cold, methodical plan, knew better. The sabbatical was a ghost trail. She spent the next few hours walking the perimeter of their apartment, the polished floors reflecting her growing hysteria. She checked his passport drawer, empty, his personal travel bag, missing. She realized the truth with nauseating certainty. He hadn't packed for a short trip. He had packed for a new life. He had left everything, the millions, the career, the social standing, and her. The weight of her infidelity, which she had successfully compartmentalized into the thrilling, secret corners of her mind, now rushed out, flooding her with crushing guilt. He knew. He had known. And instead of demanding an explanation, a fight, or a divorce settlement, he had chosen the most devastating form of revenge, The vanishing act. She found herself staring at the elevator door, realizing the exact trajectory of his exit. Down, out, and gone. He hadn't slammed a door. He had simply removed the entire hinge. The silence he had left behind was not empty, but heavy, a vast hollow space filled entirely with her guilt and the terrifying uncertainty of the future. She was still Mrs. Hayes, trapped in the gilded cage, but now the key holder was nowhere to be found, and the terms of her captivity were terrifyingly undefined. She was alone with her secrets, condemned by his silence. The immediate scramble to find Ethan lasted only 3 days before it collapsed under the weight of his meticulous planning. The police, dealing with genuine crises, dismissed the vanishing of a highly solvent architect as a probable voluntary departure, a man who needed space. The FBI laughed politely at the notion of an architect being kidnapped. To the world, Ethan was simply on his self-imposed, mysterious, and very inconvenient sabbatical. To Olivia, the silence was a constant, searing accusation. The penthouse, once a symbol of achievement, became a mausoleum. She consulted Prescott, the family's old guard attorney, a man whose silver hair and conservative vestments embodied the very Boston establishment they sought to impress. Prescott was grimly precise. Since Mr. Hayes has not contacted you and there is no evidence of foul play, kidnapping, or duress, we cannot file for divorce based on abandonment in the state of Massachusetts immediately. If we cannot locate him, you must wait until we can legally presume him deceased, which, as you know, is a period of 7 long years. 7 years. The number echoed in the vast, empty rooms of the apartment. A 7-year sentence for a crime she had committed but never confessed. Ethan had not only left, he had legally shackled her to his ghost. She was Mrs. Hayes, trapped in a ghost marriage, a legally bound union that existed only on paper, denying her the freedom to move forward, to explain, or to publicly grieve. The social pressure was immense. Boston society, fueled by old money and tight circles, began to turn. At first, there was sympathy. Poor Olivia, her brilliant husband cracked under pressure, but suspicion quickly set in. Why was she so calm? Why hadn't she hired a private investigator immediately? Whispers started at gallery openings. A man like Ethan Hayes doesn't just vanish unless he found something. The inference was clear. The vanishing was her fault, the ultimate, elegant judgment on her secret. She tried to find solace in Marcus, the very catalyst of her destruction. Their affair, once passionate and reckless, now became furtive and toxic. Marcus, basking in the glow of his newfound success, aided by Olivia's relentless promotion of his work, found the situation increasingly inconvenient. He wanted a muse, not a woman dragging the heavy anchor of a missing, potentially vengeful husband. Their intimacy was now often interrupted by Olivia's sudden cold realization that she was still wearing Ethan's name. "You're still bound to him, Liv," Marcus once hissed during a desperate moment in the dark studio, the smell of fresh paint and guilt heavy in the air. "You can't just pretend he never existed." "I'm waiting, Marcus," she retorted, the lie tasting like ash. "I'm waiting for the legal process." But the process was glacial, and the wait was agonizing. She couldn't sell the penthouse. It was joint property. She couldn't fully access certain investment portfolios. She was financially comfortable thanks to Ethan's earlier, almost benevolent generosity, but she was institutionally paralyzed. One afternoon, sitting alone in the silence, she picked up the utility bill that had rested beside the wedding ring. It was the gas bill. Ethan, the meticulous architect, had paid every single bill up to the day of his departure, except for this one, tiny, outstanding payment. It was $5.17. A symbolic piece of unfinished business, a deliberate detail he had left behind to confirm his intentionality, a small, irritating crumb of control. She paid the $5.17 online, feeling the sting of the final, small act of subservience to his departed will. The most corrosive aspect was the internal conflict. She couldn't tell anyone the truth, that Ethan knew, that he had witnessed her betrayal and delivered his verdict in the form of absolute, devastating silence. She couldn't confess because it would immediately confirm the social speculation and completely ruin her professional standing. So Olivia Hayes, the elegant gallerist, maintained the facade of the worried, abandoned wife, while internally battling the knowledge that her husband's vanishing was her just and deserved punishment, a punishment more brutal than any public argument, because it was eternal, and it forced her to live with her own guilt, unacknowledged and unforgiven, for 7 long years. She was a ghost walking through her own life, haunted by a ghost who refused to die. The heat of Phoenix, Arizona, was a thick, physical presence, fundamentally different from the humid, polished chill of Boston. It was a stripping-down heat, relentless and honest, forcing life to be functional rather than ornamental. Ethan Hayes, now operating professionally under the simplified name E. Hale, found the environment therapeutic. The jagged, unforgiving mountains and the vast, blue sky offered a kind of non-judgmental scale that dwarfed the petty jealousies and social hierarchies of the East Coast. He started small, a single development project focused on sustainable, desert-adapted housing. He wasn't seeking prestige or magazine covers, he was seeking purpose. His work shifted from designing towering glass monuments to crafting spaces that offered shelter, peace, and simplicity. It was a profound intellectual detox, forcing him to engage with the earth, with structure, with reality, in a way the pursuit of fame in Boston never had. He had traded the anxiety of the gilded cage for the stark, beautiful minimalism of the arid landscape. He maintained his operational silence meticulously. All communication with his blind trust was handled by a third party, and his primary Boston phone, the one linked to his old identity, was incinerated days after his arrival. He was financially secure, but lived deliberately without luxury, finding that the absence of excessive wealth also removed the attendant anxiety and pretense. The first true shift in his emotional landscape arrived not with a thunderclap, but with the quiet clarity of a high desert morning. Her name was Nora. He met her near a construction site. She was arguing fiercely with a concrete supplier about the ecological impact of a certain aggregate. Nora was a landscape architect, specializing in reclaiming native desert gardens. She was fiercely independent, dressed in work boots and faded denim, her face perpetually dusted with soil and sunlight. She was the absolute antithesis of the curated, gallery-perfect image of Olivia. Their connection was built on the shared reverence for building things that lasted and made sense. Nora didn't ask about his past. When he offered vague details about a difficult divorce, she simply nodded, her hazel eyes direct and unprying. "Everyone's got a ghost in the closet out here, Ethan," she had said one evening, watching the sunset paint the superstition mountains a violent orange. "The desert has a way of sweeping the dust clean, but it leaves the foundations exposed. You just got to make sure your foundation's solid." He found himself slowly, carefully, beginning to trust her with the fragmented truths. He told her about the suffocating pressure of his Boston life, about the quiet death of his marriage long before the betrayal. He spoke about the need to vanish, not as an act of calculated revenge, but as a desperate bid for self-preservation. It wasn't about hurting her, he confessed one night, sitting on the dusty porch of his rental, the air scented with creosote. It was about saving the last bit of myself. I knew if I stayed, I would have become a monstrous, broken version of the man I was supposed to be. Nora listened, tracing a pattern on her beer bottle. "So you didn't choose silence to punish her," she finally concluded, her voice soft. "You chose silence to start forgiving yourself." That phrase, "start forgiving yourself," was the key that unlocked years of corrosive bitterness. He realized his vanishing act was the ultimate act of self-love, cutting off the poison entirely, instead of engaging in the slow, mutually assured destruction of a public divorce. As the years passed, Ethan found a new kind of love with Nora, a sturdy, unpretentious affection rooted in shared work and mutual respect. There were no grand pronouncements or penthouse views, only the deep, shared peace of two people building a life based on authenticity. The rage that had fueled his initial escape slowly dissolved under the intense desert sun, replaced by a quiet, settled happiness he hadn't known was possible. He was no longer Ethan Hayes, the missing Boston architect, shackled to a ghost marriage. He was Ethan, the builder, the man who had chosen to dismantle his whole life to save his soul, a man finally free from the need for external validation or the approval of a gilded society. He had found his bloom in the most unlikely of barren places. He carried no anger for Olivia, only a quiet, resolute pity for the toxic trap he had escaped. But the ghost marriage still lingered, a 7-year tether he knew he would soon have to cut officially. The time for his return, though brief and strategic, was approaching. 6 years and 7 months. The statute of limitations for the ghost marriage was rapidly approaching. Olivia had mentally marked the countdown, clinging to the finality of the 7-year presumption of death. She had endured the social whispering, maintained the fragile stability of her gallery. Marcus had long since moved on to a younger, less complicated patron, and learned to live with the perpetual, hollow ache of guilt. She was outwardly polished, impeccably dressed, but the gilded cage had become a prison of isolation. The news of the new, ultra-luxury hotel and mixed-use development in the Seaport District had rocked Boston's real estate world. It was a massive, visionary project, and the head of the mysterious development firm, Hale and Associates, was flying in from Phoenix to make a rare public appearance at the annual Governor's Gala. The name E. Hale meant nothing to Olivia, just another player in the city's endless cycle of wealth and ambition. The gala was held in the very hall where she and Ethan had often danced. Olivia, wearing a stunning emerald gown, was navigating the room, a professional smile plastered on her face, when the ambient hum of conversation suddenly shifted. A strange, magnetic stillness settled over the room's inner circle. She saw him first in profile, shaking hands with the mayor. He was older, of course. The sharp angles of his face were softened, not by age, but by a certain internal peace. He was taller, broader, and his suit, though flawlessly tailored, carried none of the suffocating stiffness of the Boston uniform. His hair was slightly longer, lightly salted with gray, and his posture was relaxed, confident, without being arrogant. He looked like the perfected version of the man she had once known. He was Ethan. The shock was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. The blood drained from her face, leaving her marble white beneath her makeup. She dropped her champagne flute, and the sound of the crystal shattering on the marble floor was, paradoxically, the loudest sound in the suddenly hushed room. Ethan turned, drawn by the sound. Their eyes met across the 20 feet of polished floor. The distance was immense, stretching across 6 years of separate lives, across a desert, and across an ocean of unforgiven silence. Olivia expected rage, or perhaps a flicker of wounded recognition. She was prepared for bitterness, for the accusation she had lived with for years, but Ethan's expression held none of it. There was no anger, no hatred, and, most crushingly, no pain. His eyes, once intense and analytical, were now calm, clear, and absolutely neutral. He looked at her not with the familiarity of a spouse, but with the cool, professional detachment one reserves for a distant acquaintance, or perhaps a monument of historical interest. The true revelation, the psychological knife twist, was not his success. Olivia could have handled a successful Ethan, an angry Ethan, or even a vengeful Ethan. She was prepared for him to have married someone younger, more beautiful, more influential. What she was not prepared for was the absolute, undeniable serenity that radiated from him. His happiness was not performative. It was authentic, deeply rooted, and entirely unconcerned with her presence. He was whole. He was free. In that moment, Olivia understood the magnitude of her failure. The man she had driven away, the man whose silence had become her prison, had not used his freedom for spite or retribution. He had used it for inner peace. She realized that the kind of genuine tranquility she saw in his eyes, the kind that comes from self-acceptance and a life truly lived, was the one thing her frantic, image-obsessed, adulterous life had utterly failed to provide him. He had found the stability and grace that her own instability had destroyed. Ethan held her gaze for perhaps 3 seconds. He gave the briefest, most professional nod, a gesture of acknowledgement appropriate for a powerful new developer meeting an old client. There was no warmth, no malice, just a clinical recognition. Then he calmly turned back to the mayor, seamlessly resuming his conversation about zoning permits and foundation work. The message was clear, delivered without a single spoken word. I am not your husband, Olivia. I am not your victim. I have moved on, and my new reality is completely independent of the disaster you created. Olivia stood rooted to the spot, the champagne soaking into the marble around her shattered glass. She was not just seeing her missing husband return. She was confronting the irrefutable evidence of the life he had built without her. The ghost of her husband was corporeal now, and his quiet happiness was the final, devastating piece of his elegant revenge. She was the one left haunted. 2 weeks after the gala, the ghost of Ethan Hayes finally sent his first and last communication. It arrived not as a call, a letter, or a confrontation, but as a thick, unmarked envelope delivered by a corporate courier. The return address belonged to a high-profile commercial law firm in downtown Boston, a firm Ethan had never used. Olivia opened it with hands that slightly trembled, a relic of the anxiety that had been her constant companion for 6 years. Inside lay the divorce petition. It was clean, concise, and utterly devoid of venom. The papers cited irreconcilable differences, the most vanilla of legal reasons. The documents had been formally filed in Phoenix, Arizona, listing Ethan Hayes as the petitioner. Attached was the settlement proposal. Olivia sat down abruptly, the heavy leather chair protesting softly beneath her. The terms were not a negotiation. They were a declaration of independence. Ethan waived all claims to the penthouse, the entirety of his former architectural firm's current valuation, and offered a significant additional financial package from the blind trusts he had established years ago. There was no demand for alimony, no request for inventory, no bitter accounting of who owned which piece of art or antique furniture. The terms were staggering in their generosity and their silence. He wasn't seeking revenge or even half the assets. He was seeking closure. Olivia, the calculating gallerist who understood the precise market value of everything, realized the symbolic weight of the offer. This wasn't alimony. It was the cost of his silence, the price of his freedom, and a grand payment to purchase his own definitive absence from her life. He was ensuring she had absolutely no legal or financial pretext to ever contact him again. She didn't need a lawyer to understand the subtext. He didn't need the fight, the public airing of their soiled laundry, or the validation of a judge declaring her at fault. He didn't want the spectacle. He simply wanted to dissolve the ghost marriage on his own terms, making the separation absolute, final, and indisputable. She picked up the only personal document included, a single short letter from Ethan's Arizona counsel, written in a formal tone. Mr. Hayes's primary request is that the agreement be executed swiftly and without contestation. He wishes Ms. Hayes well and considers this chapter entirely closed. Olivia walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Boston skyline glittering coldly back at her. The silence in the penthouse was no longer the oppressive quiet of his ghost, but the terrifying quiet of true solitude. She thought back to the gala, to the profound, unhurried peace in his eyes. He hadn't come back to reclaim his old life. He had come back to cut the last string to it. He hadn't sought to wound her. He had simply built a new existence so strong that the old pain held no power over him. His final act was not one of hatred, but a final, powerful act of self-love, and strangely, a silent, terrible form of grace. He had let her go. He had freed her from the 7-year sentence by proving he was alive and offering a clean break, preventing the legal limbo from dragging on. He had pardoned her, not with words, but with an unparalleled act of financial and emotional renunciation. That night, Olivia Hayes finally signed the papers. As the ink dried, she felt the phantom weight of the wedding ring lift from her finger, the spiritual tether finally broken. The ghost marriage was over. She had received her consequence, years of self-imprisonment, and she had received her resolution, a crushing, public vindication, coupled with a private, deep-seated understanding that the greatest thing she had lost was not wealth or status, but the genuine, quiet capacity for happiness that Ethan had found the moment he walked away without a word. The story was over. She was finally free to face her own reflection, stripped bare of the gilded cage, ready to begin the long, painful work of confronting herself.